Welcome back to Live Unleashed Radio. We're now joined by somebody who I'm really, really excited to have in here. We're talking about somebody who has survived a life-threatening crash, somebody who has toured around multiple nations, somebody who has written books, taught courses, has had a headlining show out here for many, many years, a great hypnotist, but even more important, a wonderful human being. We have Marc Savard here in the studio.
Wow, thank you for having me. That's quite the intro. I was looking around wondering who you're introducing.
No, but that's just it. And I've noticed this a lot. When we live our lives, sometimes we don't really look at like what we've done because we're in the middle of doing it.
You know, it's funny that you say that because I was just having this conversation no more than a week ago that when it's nice when family members come to town to visit because when I go to work, I go the back way. I don't see the strip. So I drive into this big concrete building in a parking garage. I go to valet, drop my car off. I go, I work, I leave. When family comes to town and they're like, oh, I'm going to come to the show with you. Can you pick me up? So you drive down the strip because they want to see the strip. And they're like, oh, my God, that's fantastic. Look at this. Look at that. Look at that. They're so excited. And then they say something like, I can't believe you perform here 6 nights a week. And then when you hear that, you realize, you're right. It is something that, 300 million people across the country, think is the coolest thing. And sometimes I might take it for granted.
And it's easy to do that. I mean, when the ultimate vacation spot is your backyard, that's all it becomes to is your backyard. You can forget that not only is it something special, but you're doing something special in that special area.
And it's pretty cool that I live in a city that people pay really good money to visit.
Mm-hmm.
And we live here.
And it's funny because I don't know if you have this experience, but like my girlfriend and I were offered tickets to Love about a month ago, and we accepted them. But there's like this 20-minute period where we're going, I don't know if I want to go back to the Strip tonight. And then I'm thinking about how people plan their entire vacations on going to see this show.
Right.
And we're wondering if it's worth a 20-minute drive.
Yeah, because the parking is a pain in the butt.
Yeah.
But, and after you see, that's something that we really do enjoy. My wife and I are celebrating our 16th anniversary on Friday, and we're going to go do something fun. It's going to be great. But every Friday night is my night off, and we try to do date night. And living back home in Canada, in Edmonton, Canada, you could go to a couple of restaurants within, if you went out every Friday night, within 8 or 10 weeks, you've kind of went to all the good restaurants. Whereas here in Las Vegas, it doesn't end. We go out for dinner every Friday night. We try to, at least. And we try world-class restaurants with world-class chefs. We're not talking about some guy who's running the fryer in the back. We're talking about world-class chefs. And we get to experience that, and we get world-class shows. We are constantly entertained, and it is just an absolute treat. I love this city more than any city I've ever lived in.
The one thing that I tell people about Vegas is boredom is a choice. And there are some times when you live here that you really choose, I want to sit at home and be bored. I don't want to be overstimulated from the lights.
Right, and I think that does happen, and I think if you keep that balance, and I'm married and I have 4 daughters, and so I get the balance of the opposite of the Las Vegas Boulevard Strip, whereas I'm going to birthday parties on a Saturday afternoon and we're going to the bouncy houses. And, so there is a normal part of the lifestyle. People think, oh, what does a headliner live like? It must be, you wake up at 5 p.m. and you go do a show and then you go out and it's comped bottles and showgirls and all that kind of stuff. And no, that's not how I live. It's how Kevin Lepine lives his life, but that's not how I live my life.
It's funny, but there was a time and a place, and that was New Orleans. Thankfully, I grew up a little bit before I came out here. Now, of course, you're at the V Theater.
Yep.
6 nights a week, 10 p.m. show.
Yep.
Now, first of all, a lot of people are surprised by this. Why Friday night off?
Friday is not normally a great night in town for me, and it hasn't been at the V Theater, primarily because I think 30% of the population that comes into Las Vegas for the weekend comes from Southern California. So what happens? You work until 4:30 or 5. You're 5 hours, 6 hours on the road, which should only take 3 hours and 45 minutes, but the bumper-to-bumper traffic, and everyone's coming to Vegas for the weekend. So by the time you get to town, it's 10 o'clock. Well, what do you do when you first get to town? You haven't even checked in. You got your luggage with you, and you stuff it underneath the roulette table, and you're putting some money on black. And by the time you kind of get organized, it's 11:30 before you really know what you're doing on a Friday night. So that takes a little while for the crowds to kind of come out. So it's never really been a great night for me. And would that be different now, 7.5 years later? It's quite possible, but when I first opened 7.5 years, that's kind of the way it played. We tried being dark on Sunday, dark on Friday, and Friday was the worst night. Is it different now? Maybe, but because my routine's now set, I'm not going to change my dark day.
But also, I mean, like Penn and Teller do dark on Fridays. There's a lot of shows because, Friday is an arrival day, not a destination day.
Correct. And I think that that's probably, what's really happened. And Sunday is kind of the same thing. You're either going home and the new people are coming in from the Sunday to Thursday week. So that's also a transition day. So routinely, those were kind of my worst days, and I picked Friday because it was worse than Sunday.
The funny thing for me is the reason that Sunday nights are good for me is since I'm an 8 o'clock show, there's about 25% of my audience that is honestly there with their luggage because I'm right next to the airport, and I'm the last thing they do before the plane ride.
They're taking the red eye that night.
Now, how did you get started in hypnosis?
It was an accident. It really was. I was trying to get into med school, and I was going to college, University of Alberta, and I was enrolled in the science program. And trying to get into med school and do that thing, that whole routine. And my mom, hey, my son's going to be a doctor. This is so exciting, And I went to a hypnosis show. And the legal drinking age in Alberta, Canada is 18. So 18 years old, went to a nightclub show.
In Windsor, it's 19. I know that because I lived in Detroit.
Yes. That was a frequent path you probably lived.
Yeah,
for 2 years until you were. So anyway, long story short, I ended up going to a hypnosis show and was fascinated by hypnosis. I couldn't believe that someone could use the power of words to modify someone else's human behavior and make them do some ridiculous scenarios. And being the inquisitive person that I am, this was unacceptable to just accept this as wow, that was very cool. I had to understand why. So I got some books and some research and started doing a little bit of research on it on my own and finding out, well, how is this possible? And my friends got wind of it, and they said, hey, why don't you hypnotize us? So I did. And from a book, which I don't recommend anyone do. So I hypnotized my friends, and sure enough, I brought 3 people over to my apartment, and one of the girls that was there got hypnotized. And to this day, she's probably the deepest person I've ever hypnotized. She was sent to me by the hypnosis gods. It was a calling, and she would experience all types of hypnotic phenomena, from amnesia to anesthesia to hallucinations. You name it, she would experience everything. Kinesthetic delusions to time distortion. It didn't matter what it was. If I suggested it, she would respond, and it was incredible. And so it was a great, volunteer to cut my teeth on sort of thing. And then my friends got wind of it more and more, and I started doing hypnosis parties at my apartment. I invite, at one time we had 42 people over at my 2-bedroom apartment, and condensation's beating down the walls. It was so hot in this place. And I'm doing a show, in a mini show in my living room. And this continues on every Friday night. And finally, a sports team called me and they said, hey, we heard you do shows. I said, well, I don't really do shows. I'm just kind of, it's more of a hobby. No, we want you to do a show. We want you to, we'll pay you to do our year-end sports party. And what we'll do is, we have about 50 people coming. And I said, sure, I'll do it. So they paid me $150. And I drove 5 hours to do this show, and which the joke was totally on them because I would have done it for $100. I was so excited to do it.
Yep.
And so I did the first show, and then my phone started ringing. The first year I did 6 shows. The second year I did 52. The year after, 115. And then I decided to quit college. So I called my parents and said, I'm not going to be a doctor. I'm going to be a freak show variety entertainer, hypnotist, carnival hack, or, is what they heard. But it's not what I believed. And so it was a very tough time. My mom was very disappointed, but now it's turned out that 21 years later, she's my biggest fan. And
I was going to say, I've met her. I don't think you'll ever have a bigger fan than her in your life.
Yeah, she's a lot of fun.
She really is, and so in your corner. But now, you don't just go from 6 to 52 to 115 by accident. You don't just, randomly get magic phone calls all the time. What were some of the first steps you took to go, all right, I'm going to make a career out of this, and I'm going to do this to get bookings? What was one of the first things that really got you there?
The first step was getting a business card printed. I thought it was the most important piece. If you don't have a business card, it's not very serious, right? And then by then, this was a different time.
I stared at my first business card for about 2 days.
Yeah, it was official. That meant you're official. I went from being an amateur to a professional with $30 printing of business cards. And that's when I became a professional. And so that's kind of how the first step was. And then I started, was fortunate. I actually got into a comedy club, and I performed every Tuesday night at a comedy club called Yuck Yucks. And they had a hypnosis night, and they would, offer $5 college nights, so it was all full of college kids, and it was just a great experience. So I had a weekly gig. So and almost immediately I had that. So that really got my numbers up. When I started doing that show, a lot of I would announce at the end of the show, hey, if you want to use me for a corporate party or your company barbecue or something like that, grab a card from me. I think it's these freshly printed business cards I have. So grab a card from me after the show. And that's where it started, kind of snowballing. And then it became word of mouth. People started telling people, and they saw the show. And I think that my passion for what I did came through. And that's when people really can see that you like what you do, you care about what you do, you want to be better at what you're doing, and you're investing not only your heart and soul, but your sweat and tears and everything into it. And I think that when that comes across, people see that, and it becomes transparent, and they know that you're going to take care of their event the same way that you just took care of the event that you were on stage. And I think that when entertainers become to the point where they're so burnt out that they're texting it in, they're phoning it in, they're not on stage, that really comes across. And I think that that's a disservice to the audience, and that should be the day you should retire. If you don't like it and you don't want to be doing it anymore, get off stage.
And it's funny too, because I've had this conversation with people where they're like, oh, I want to be an entertainer because I'm going to make great money at it. If you're doing it for the money, you can do anything else in the world and make more. If you don't have the passion and the love. And because I say this all the time. Audiences know when you're not being sincere.
Right.
And they'll turn on you on a dime for that one.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's probably, and with hypnosis especially, we're exposed to the rapport relationship that we have with an audience. Mm-hmm. And the moment they turn on you, a comedian can get them back, a band can get them back. This song sucks. And the next song comes out, this song's awesome. And then they win the crowd back. In our case, we have to build rapport in the shortest amount of time in order to get volunteers to participate on stage. Once they participate on stage and we get them hypnotized, then we don't need to create rapport anymore. Mm-hmm. But it's that first key point. I want to give you my mind, which is, that's not the case, but I want to surrender my mind to you, so I have to trust you. And if they don't trust you in those first minutes, you're climbing uphill the whole way.
And when Will joins us, we'll talk about this, but we've always said like the three pillars to anything was I'm friendly, I'm capable, and I have good boundaries. And when you can express that, people are willing to volunteer. As soon as they go, oh, I can trust Marc. He's not going to make me feel bad for being up there.
Well, and I think that I modified that. I found the Vegas audience was a lot tougher than maybe a corporate crowd and maybe a fairs and festivals crowd.
Oh, yes.
Or a high school crowd. Vegas, I think, is the hardest venue I've ever played because it's people from all different countries, all different nationalities, all different backgrounds, all different. Everything about them is different. And a lot of times they travel in couples. So in order to get a volunteer, you have to split a couple up. Hey, send the husband up. Then the wife sits there alone. So there's a lot of things that you are battling in order to get people up on stage. But the one line I added in that has made a huge difference is, if I embarrass or ridicule you on stage, nobody wins. But if you leave here having the time of your lives, saying how this was absolutely amazing, had so much fun, I'd like to do it again, you're going to tell 100 people about the show. And who benefits the most from that? I do. So it's in my best interest that you leave here talking about the show in a good way. And when I say that, it has changed the amount of participation because people go, yeah, that's true. If he takes good care of us, it's a win-win for everybody. We'll talk about the show. And that changed the amount of volunteers that participated in my show.
And it's great when they want to like you. That makes a huge difference right there. Now, well before Vegas, what was one of the first gigs that you had where you went, oh my God, I've made it?
There's been a few that come along as you kind of hit milestones and it all depends on where you're at in your career. When you're at the beginning part of your career and I landed that comedy club, 10 shows into my career, I'm like, oh my God, I've made it. And then a few years go by and then you do another bigger show, like a huge festival, and you're like, oh my God, I made it. And it just keeps going. And in 1999 was the first time that I kind of really felt like I couldn't top the show that I did. And in 1999, I performed for the National Hockey League player Wayne Gretzky's retirement dinner.
Nice.
And there was 2,999 people. They ended it on a 99, of course, because he wore 99. And it was my idol, being a Canadian, Northern Alberta Canadian kid. I cheered for the Edmonton Oilers, and I cheered for Wayne Gretzky. I mean, when they won their first Stanley Cup, I was 10 years old. So they won it when I was 10, when I was 11, when I was 13, I think 16. So, I mean, like it was, and then, or 14 and 16. So right in the ages of, when I was a teenager, really, really interested in the sport. So I got to perform for his retirement dinner, and there was, I think, approximately 60 current National Hockey League players and about 100 retired National Hockey League players that I really held up on a pedestal, and they were an idol to me, all of them. And it was such a euphoric experience, not only doing the show, but at the end of the show, backstage, when they would come up to me and go, "Oh my God, that was so crazy." And now, normally I would be like, "I can't believe it. It's Wayne Gretzky. Oh my God, it's Marc Messier. Oh my God, it's Yari Curry." All these huge NHL stars. I would have normally been just all over the place like a little puppy. They were doing that to me. And it was such a weird experience because they're all real. I mean, they're $1 million kids, playing hockey. Some of the current NHL players, and they were treating me like I was a rock star. And that was a moment where I realized this is what a neat euphoric experience that I don't know if I'll ever top that. And performing in Vegas has been huge, and doing a lot of things that I've done has been. I've got some great staples in my career, but that for one. To answer your question, was probably the biggest moment of my career, and that's when I felt like I made it.
And now, because I've noticed this with me, when I've had a gig like that, it's changed my confidence level for the gigs that would come later.
I agree. I think that once you have a mind expanding experience, you can't fit your head back into your mind, or rather, your head back into your skull. It feels like once you have. I mean, that's what experience is. There's a saying that goes, the man who steps off the boarding platform onto the train and reads the newspaper is no longer the man that was standing on the platform. Because once you take in information, you cannot analyze a situation the way you used to because your knowledge level is different and your experience level is different. The moment you do something different and go through experience, like, for example, when I teach hypnosis classes, I try to put myself in the mindset of a beginner doing hypnosis, and I can't because I'm not. I'm 21 years in the career. I try to relate to that, but I try to remember what that felt like, but I don't think it the same way. And then when a situation comes up, in my mind, I'm like, no, I would do this. It's an easy solution. But 21 years ago, that wasn't an easy solution. Because experience is something you can't sell. You have to go through it. You have to. I wish I could put it in a canister and give it to people, and you can't. You got to go through it.
Yeah, I once heard that wisdom is experience that came 10 minutes too late. But yeah, but after you've grown through that, it's great because you go through these situations, and then you never worry about it again because you go, oh, well, I've walked here, and now I can walk there again. Now, before Vegas, there was the car accident.
Yes.
And this was, and this also goes into something else where you are very, very, very into anti-drunk driving.
Correct.
Can you elaborate just a little bit on the accident? Because I don't really want to misspeak about what happened to you, because I know this was a major event.
Yeah, it really was something that has defined my character. And my character could have gone either way. And it is a very, very challenging experience to go through something like that. And it can take the best of you, or it can bring the best out of you. And I was fortunate that I was able to turn that and propel it into something that would benefit me as a person and benefit the community as well. And to go back, I was doing a performance at a youth conference, and I finished taking down all of our gear, myself and two crew guys that I had with me. And we loaded up the truck and the trailer. I was driving a 1994 Ford Explorer with about a 12-foot trailer that was pulling behind a utility trailer in a fiberglass shell. And all of the gear was in there, traveling with, 6,000 pounds worth of gear, like automated lights and trussing and you name it. It was in there. Too big of a show. I mean, it was a pain in the butt. We load up the truck about 20 minutes onto the road. We're driving at full highway speed on just a two-lane highway, a small two-lane highway, traveling between 60 and 65 miles an hour. And at last minute, a set of headlights that was coming towards us swerved into my center lane and hit my vehicle head on. And so full highway speed crash. I broke my back. I cracked a C3 in my neck. I had a basal skull fracture, broke the base of my skull, broke my eye socket. I was leaking brain fluid out my nose. Very, very horrific car crash. My stagehand, the guy that was traveling with me, was sitting in the passenger seat. He broke some ribs, smashed up his face pretty good. He was wearing like a laced-up dress shoe, like a brogue-style dress shoe, and they flew right off his feet, just to give an idea of the impact. They were laced up on his feet, and then 5 minutes later, he's standing on the road going, "Where are my shoes?" And they just flew off his feet, just to give an idea of the impact that's involved. The third guy that normally was traveling with me, he actually took his car because it was the end of our tour, and he was driving off to go see his girlfriend because we had 3 or 4 days off. And normally, he would have been driving. James would have been in the passenger seat. I would have been probably sleeping in the back seat, laying across the seats, which in hindsight turned out to be a blessing in disguise because of the fact that I was driving. I had a Manfrotto lighting stand, which is, Manfrotto lighting stands. They're an Italian-made, built lighting stand that literally weighs, 85 pounds, and it's a huge tripod that's, folded up. It's about 6 feet tall. And this thing shot through the trailer, broke through the fiberglass, through the back window of the truck, and it was actually laying in the back seat. So that's where I would have been.
It would have been a rocket right into your chest.
So it was just weird how that happened, that my other assistant took his car that night and I wasn't laying in the back seat, because that was the normal protocol. I slept while they drove, and the next morning I did the morning drive because I preferred driving alone while they were sleeping and had some quiet time, and I prefer mornings. So that's what ended up happening, that both vehicles started on fire. The drunk driver was killed on contact. He was not wearing his seatbelt. Fire engulfed everything. So my assistant that was with me pulled me out the passenger side of the vehicle, and with broken back and all. Lucky I didn't get paralyzed. There's a lot of things that went right in order to keep me in somewhat one piece. Then ambulance arrived on the scene, and I spent about 2 or 3 days in the hospital, 3 days in the hospital. And then I said, I want to go home. So I got transferred back to my hometown, a little tiny town of 2,500 people in northern Alberta, and where populations always stays the same. 2,500 people, population never changes over 30 years. One of those little towns, mainly because a girl gets pregnant, guy leaves town, girl gets pregnant, guy leaves town. Kind of keeps the population consistent. So I asked, and I knew all the doctors. Those doctors I grew up with. I said, "Is there a spare hospital bed that I could take home? And I want to have it at home. I want to heal at home. There's nothing wrong with me. I just need to heal." And so they agreed. So my dad and a couple of my high school buddies went to the hospital, and they went to the back underneath. This is a different time, of course, back then. And they grabbed a hospital bed from the storage area that they didn't need in the basement and put it in the pickup truck and took it to the house and cleared out the living room. And I healed at home. And I made the decision that I wanted to heal all naturally. So I got off all the medicine they gave me, Percocet, Toradol, and the painkillers and whatever, off of everything. And I did all natural healing. After about 2.5 days, I cried for 2.5 days. Why me? Why me? Why me? To the point that I was making a list of people I thought deserved it more than I did. I was really, really struggling with that, and I felt horrible. Like, what could I have done? This guy, this drunk driver, could I have moved? Could I have swerved last minute? All these questions of doubt. I felt like maybe I was responsible for his death. A lot of emotions that I went through. And after 2.5 days of saying, why me, why me, finally the light bulb went off, and I thought, this is why me. I have the skill set. I had just finished hypnotherapy training, learning about the power of the subconscious mind, how to reprogram your life, how to reprogram yourself, how to get the most out of yourself by getting the most out of your mind and body. Here I'd learned everything. It was an opportunity for me to really practice what I preached. And so I did all natural healing and then designed a program for high school students based on drinking and driving and the hypnosis show. So I would essentially do the hypnosis show. I would do a whole bunch of funny things. Then I would set up all the high school students in a car crash scenario, and they'd play out the roles of key people that would be involved in a type of car crash, like a family with a kid and high school students or whatever that had been drinking and driving, and this crash happens, and it becomes the aftermath of the crash. Then they have this very emotional experience that I set within these boundaries and these limits, and then I make them stop, and everyone freezes, and then I put them back into hypnotic sleep. And then I talk about my experience for about 10, 12 minutes about what I went through, and then I say, but none of this matters. The reason why we don't talk about drinking and driving, because we're afraid of hurting people's feelings. We don't want to talk. We don't want to ask, what was it like to kill somebody? What was it like to be paralyzed? What was it like to be injured? We're afraid. We're trying to be sensitive to people's emotions. So now we can talk about these emotions in a created scenario that they emotionally experience. So now all these high school students are talking to the panel of 1,000 high school students in the audience about what they felt. So the jock guy says, well, I felt like this. I felt terrible when I was responsible for killing a child. And then the girl who plays the mom says, oh my God, I felt these emotions. And she starts expressing. It's a very, very powerful and unique experience. And then I wrapped it up with some funny things to kind of end the presentation. It was very controversial. It was, I did that for about 10 years. 10 years traveling throughout all Canada and the United States. And it was, front page of the Vancouver Sun. Like, it was a big tour, very controversial, very, very effective. One of the most effective alcohol awareness tours that had ever toured, and I'm very proud of that. And, people say, well, why did you do it? And just to save one life is totally worth it. And we got so many emails of people that say, hey, my friend, Billy would always drink and drive from the parties, and after seeing your show, he called a cab, or he walked home, or he called his parents. And when you hear those, I would get those emails in all the time. It really made a difference to how I felt, that it felt like I was contributing, and it's something I'm extremely proud of.
Well, especially when you create a scenario that opens a discussion like that, because there are so many quote-unquote edutainment shows where it's almost like a bubblegum show with a message kind of put in there that everybody disregards immediately after. But when you can turn it into an open-ended discussion like that,
right? And it went on for weeks.
Make it personal.
It went on for weeks, because the next day they talked to Charlie about him, thinking he was the lead river dancer, as well as being part of the car crash scenario. And what was it like to feel like you had been paralyzed? Oh my God, I couldn't move my legs, and I was just thinking about not being able to play football anymore. And it became tangible. They could openly talk about this without consequence, not feel bad, not feel like they shouldn't talk about it. It really opened up communication on the idea and the concept of what the aftermaths of drinking and driving.
Now, how did you get your first gig here in Vegas?
I decided to originally move to Vegas with my wife. We were coming to conferences here, to help promote the show, and International Association of Fairs and Exhibitions Conference and things like that. And we said, I was working in the U.S. a lot. She was living back home in Canada. I'd go on the tour for 2-3 months. And I wouldn't, if I was in the U.S. touring, I wouldn't go home and see her. If I had 3 days off, it was a pain. It was a pain in the butt to cross over and go through. And remember, this is, right after 9/11. Yeah. So then it's go through airport security and then connect to a flight to go home. And then I'd lose a day in the airport, see her for a day, and then a day home. And it was expensive. And it was just so I wouldn't come home. If I had 3 days off, I'd spend 3 days off in Dallas or something. And so then I decided, well, why don't I move you to the United States? And let's have an opportunity so that we can get closer to the entertainment, find out what's happening in Vegas, keep on the pulse, and I can come home, because there's 3 flights a day from every major city in Las Vegas or more, and it's easy for me to come home. I can leave in the morning and be home by noon, and I can spend some time with you, and it's cheaper, and it's all these wonderful things. So we moved to Vegas. Then once we were here for a couple of years, we had a baby, and so now our first baby's 10 years old. And I remember going on a trip. I was performing for a bunch of back-to-back fairs and festivals, and I had a road trip planned for about 2 months. And I left when my daughter Isabel was 2 months old, and I came home when she was 4 months old.
And that's a totally different person.
Yeah. And I'm a totally different person to her as well. So, I come home and I go in, I come out of the airport, and my wife decided to stay in the truck. She's like, oh, I'll just be waiting in the truck. And I go and I open the door to the back of the truck, and my baby's there, and I'm like, hi, Isabel, it's Daddy. And she starts screaming. This is some weirdo stranger, and that broke my heart. I realized at that moment, and my wife said it to me, she goes, I didn't get married to be a single mom. And that was a heavy, heavy statement. And so we said, okay, all right, that's fine. What can we do about it? Because people, and you've heard me say this before, that, hey, whine, complain. That means nothing. The real question is, what are you going to do about it? So we talked about what's our plan. Well, our plan is let's get a Vegas showroom. So I was good buddy with Gordy Brown, who plays over at the Golden Nugget, and we had a conversation in a dinner, and I said, well, what do you have any advice? And he goes, well, let me introduce you to David Sachs. He's the owner and producer of the V Theater, and why don't you have a conversation with him? So I have a conversation with David, and he was super nice. He met me, and he says, yeah, well, when you have a show in Vegas, you have a one-off show, a corporate show here, let me know, and I'll come see you. And then, well, you know what that's like. Mm-hmm. So what's that, 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, a year, 2 years? When am I going to have my next corporate show in Las Vegas? So I decide, well, I got to put my thinking cap on. Well, maybe, what if I shoot a promotional video, but I offer to rent David's theater, rent the V Theater, and then, so I talked to him about that. Hey, I want to do a promotional video. Can I rent your theater? He goes, yeah, sure, that'd be great. And he goes, and I'll come see the show, and we'll bring all of our staff, and we'll comp it out to some ticket brokers, and it'll be great. And I'm like, that's a fantastic idea. And so that's how it started. I did a trial show on October 20th, 2006. And a few days before the show, they said, yeah, it's not going to work out. We're not going to be able to comp out to all the brokers the tickets, so you're going to have to make sure you get some people here. This was two and a half days before the show. I'm like, oh, no. So I got onto social media. Back then it was MySpace, and here I'm bragging about all my MySpace friends. Now it's time to put them to work. So I'm like, hey, I got a free show in Vegas. Come see it. And I ended up getting 500 people there and did the show. And the show was great, and it was a huge success. And after the show, David Sachs comes up to me and he goes, because he didn't really care about the quality of the show, because that's not, what that's like. It's not about that. So he goes, good show. How'd you get all these people here? Mm-hmm. And so, a couple of marketing tricks up my sleeve. And he says, well,
I sold my soul.
Right. Why don't you come in on Monday and let's talk about it? And then I went into his office the following Monday, and we signed a deal, and we opened February 22nd, 2007. So, as a matter of fact, on this Thursday, I celebrate my 2000th show.
Congratulations.
2,000 shows in Las Vegas. Thank you. So that's a lot. That's a lot of shows. And so, what a milestone. So I'm very, very proud of that.
And we're actually going to be joined right now by my co-host. He's down in New Orleans. He's somebody who specializes in hypnotherapy as well. Will, you there with us?
I am here. How you doing, Marc Savard?
I'm doing
Good
wonderful,
to meet
Will.
you.
Nice to meet you as well.
Excellent. What is it with Canadians and hypnosis shows in Vegas?
I think I have an actual legitimate answer to this question. I think I really do believe that. I mean, in Canada, the population is, 38 million, something like that, give or take a million. In California, the population's almost 40 million. So there's more people in California than there is in the entire country of Canada, and Canada's landmass is larger than the United States. So that tells you that we have small communities, and they're spread apart. And there's not very many major cities. So to become a successful touring hypnotist in Canada, you had to reinvent yourself because you're playing the same audiences all the time. So you were forced in front of the same audiences. You had to come up with new routines. You couldn't be, compliant or go through a regular pattern or routine and get by and just go to a new city each day. You had to force yourself to write good jokes and write fresh jokes and new jokes. And in doing that, I think it really pushed me to be the best entertainer that I could be, which I had to compete at a top-notch level in order to keep myself busy. And that, one, gave me experience. Two, next thing you know, I don't know, maybe we came in on the other answer to that would be we came in on Cirque du Soleil's coattails and tried to grab whatever we could.
So let me go back, if I could, to the car accident. And you said you did a lot of natural pain control, and the premise of the Live Unleashed radio show is to help people live their lives to the fullest. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you controlled your pain, how well those techniques worked for you, and how applicable do you think they are to everybody else?
Well, I truly believe that we have more medicine than any pharmacy could ever sell us, and it's a matter of tapping into that medicine. And although there's absolutely a time and a place for our medical system, and if you get your arm cut off, you don't come see a hypnotherapist. Go find an ER doc that can sew that arm back on. And so hypnosis isn't necessarily used for all that type of acute emergency type care. However, we've also put a lot of power in the position of our doctor, and we all want to be good patients. And sometimes when a doctor says, "Hey, you've got 6 months to live," I mean, does that go into the subconscious mind, and do people play out that expectation because you assume that someone knows more than you, and you have to fulfill that role? Well, my prognosis for my healing was, well, it's going to take you 6 months to heal, and you're probably not going to be able to walk completely normally anymore, and you're going to have continued back pain. And I said, okay, well, what's this based on? Well, that's based on an average American result. Well, let me ask you this, Will. Do you consider yourself to be an average American? Because I sure don't. Even despite being, I consider myself a North American. Being Canadian, I'm not trying to be coy. I'm saying I am not.
Yeah, exactly.
I am not an average, and I'll never ever think that I will be, and I don't think anybody thinks they are. And so I'm not going to heal to those results. So it became a challenge to me. It became a drive. And when people say you can't do it, I'm the personality that says, watch me. And so I did all tapping into my mind, natural healing, and broke my back on August 1st of that year. And I was playing ice hockey October 9th. So not only did I walk, not be 6 months in rehab and laying in a bed for, 8 weeks or 6 weeks that they were suspecting me to be in, I literally was playing ice hockey October 9th. So it was very, very fast. I still don't really have that many complications, if at any at all, from the back injury. And I just was so focused on where I want to go and not by the limitation. Now, could that have broke me in the figurative sense? Yeah, of course. And, people think, they want to throw this pity party for themselves. And the reality is that I'm the only one that lives my life. I'm the only one that can see my perspective. I'm the only one that's going to benefit at the end of this whole path. So I have two choices. I can whine and complain about it and go, woe is me, and look at what happened to me. Or I can flip it around and make the best out of my life. I mean, we've got one go around on this planet, so make it the best that you possibly can. Because when you complain, who really cares? Nobody wants to listen to you. Nobody wants to hang around a negative person. Your life is better if you put on a smile, you keep your head up, you keep your eyes open, you enjoy life. It's so much better.
Yeah, it's if you complain a lot, you'll surround yourself with complainers. That's who you'll attract. Were you doing at that time then? Did you do self-hypnosis several times a day? Or was it just more that you were determined to get off the pain meds?
It was both. I was using self-hypnosis on a daily basis. I had just graduated from hypnotherapy training, and this was something that was it was an opportunity for me to not only show myself, but to show everyone around me. And the doctor that was treating me at the time was South African, and he was not a pill pusher doctor, which was wonderful.
Nice.
And so I said, I want to do self-hypnosis and go off all the medication. And he says, that is fantastic. I'm so proud of you. And he takes my chart and he writes on it, no more meds. And he goes, this is fantastic. Let me know how it goes. Keep me posted. So very, very supportive, which 21 years ago, it was not necessarily easy to find. And so I use visualization. Visualization, and much like we can, when I talk about visualization to my clients, sometimes they don't really know what I'm saying and how the focus of how your mind is, where your attention goes, your mind and body follow. So it's like golf. When you're golfing, people say, I'm always hitting the water. Well, what are you thinking when you're teeing up? Well, I'm thinking, don't hit the water, don't hit the water, don't hit the water. Well, that's not how you drive your car. You don't drive your car down the road going, don't hit the ditch, don't hit the ditch, don't hit the ditch. No, you drive it
You'll
down.
go in the ditch.
Right, you drive it down the road. So where your attention goes, your mind and your body follow. And so I focused my attention on not only healing, but putting myself in the proper mindset to heal. And I used visualization, like little things, like I imagined these little tiny lemmings men that would go through my bloodstream and take away all the damaged pieces and rebuild the bones. And it sounds so silly, but I would spend probably 20 to 30 minutes a couple of times a day just closing my eyes and internally focusing on the healing. And when that happens and you put your focus on that, your body is a self-healing organism. It knows what it needs to do. So stop doing what's making you worse and start focusing on what can make you better, and get out of the way of your body's healing and allow it to do what it's supposed to do, and you'll be absolutely amazed at what it's capable of.
Did you forgive the drunk driver?
I did. That was easy.
That was easy?
Yep. I didn't forgive myself. That's what took so much more work, because I was okay. I was angry the first couple of days, and then I was past it. Then there was an opportunity. And once I started doing the alcohol awareness program for the high school students, I had a purpose. And it didn't take long that I started saying that, you know what, this car crash was actually the best thing that's ever happened to me. It truly is. I don't know how my life would have turned out had that not happened. It really was the best thing that's ever happened to me. And it has shaped me to be a person with a completely different perspective, perspective on life. And I try to pass that along to my children and the people that are around me, and try to use it as an inspiration. And to be my own success story. That was super, super valuable and super important. But forgiving myself, because I felt like, even though looking back at it now, I don't think I could have done anything differently. But I doubt it. What if I could have stopped for a drink? Then he would have been at a different spot on the highway? What if I would have been hungry for a bag of chips? What if we would have taken slightly longer? Or what if we would have been a little bit quicker loading the gear up? Remember when we were messing around and we were throwing the tape around? What if we wouldn't have done that? All of these things that I felt like he could have still been alive. It took me a lot longer to forgive myself than it did to forgive him.
And what's the process? What do you think finally helped you?
I think that the support that I had of the people around me made a big difference. My parents, there's nothing you could have done. My sisters, come on, I mean, and then hearing, some of the backstories of about his life, meaning, this was bound to happen because this guy was an alcoholic and drove drunk all the time. He's, this lucky it happened this way, and he didn't take out a family of 6 and kill everybody. Trying to look at the positive of what happened, because reality is, I could have speculated a million things that could have happened, but what happened was the drunk driver hit me on the highway. That's what happened. And I realized that the past doesn't exist. The past is merely a memory, and you can't live in that past. It's merely a memory of what happened. And the future doesn't exist. It's just a prediction of what you think can happen. None of us can predict the future. All you can live is the here and the now. And if you focus on living your life in the here and now, it makes the past easier to accept and the future a lot easier to accept as well.
Now, there's...
Yeah, I want to pull something out of that is that I think part of that key, especially when you're talking about forgiving yourself, is accepting that it did happen and not trying to change it. And I think the other thing I want to pull out of there, too, is you found gratitude for it. And I think both of those things do lead to forgiveness, whether it's the other person or yourself. I'm sorry, Kev, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to bring up, Marc, like the one accomplishment that you have that just still blows my mind. GIRL, right?
Yes.
And what are those letters?
Well, they're not in that
right,
particular order.
But
our first daughter her name's Isabel, and then our second daughter, her name's Renee, and then our third daughter, Genevieve. And we decided, well, we're going to try for one more. And we found out that we were pregnant for another girl. So 4 girls. And it dawned on me at about 6 months into the pregnancy, well, we've got the G, the I, the R. We have to name this 4th baby an L to make the acronym girl. And with the last name Savard, now we have girls. So so whenever we sign our cards, if we send you flowers or something like that, it's going to say Marc, Joanna, and girls. So it works out perfect. So that's and what an awesome. I'm the richest man in the world with those 4 girls.
And that's what impresses me. It's not just that you've got the show, that it's been that successful, that you've been able to turn that success that way, but you also have this family with 4 amazing kids.
I think I live my life more as a dad of 4 girls than I do a Vegas headliner. It happened to just leave for a couple hours and go do a show. It happens to be my job. But it's cool. It's really cool. And I'm having so much fun. My baby just turned 1, and she's all over the place, all over the house. She's walking around like a little drunk human being, wobbling everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's just awesome. I'm having so much fun.
Now,
I have a 2-year-old, and it's a lot like living with drunks. It's the same thing.
Now, Will, did you have something you wanted to cover on the physical end today?
Well, actually, I think the best thing I could cover today is kind of a little bit of what we talked about, which is forgiveness. And I think it's something that holds so many of us back. And I think when we don't forgive, we are left carrying the anger, and the people we have to forgive usually don't even know, are not affected by this anger at all. And I think we've talked enough about, and there's enough literature about how anger eats us up. And I think that looking at forgiveness or holding on to a grudge as an adaptive process can help lead us into how we can find forgiveness. When we don't forgive, what we're doing is we're trying to protect ourselves to keep this thing from happening again. Marc talked about, what if I did this? What if I did that? And I believe that all of that goes back to the fear of this could happen again. And when we experience a trauma, it goes into us in a way so that we're trying to protect ourselves. Our brain is always trying to be vigilant for this thing that happened, and we can become fearful. And so I think the first piece is to recognize, what are you afraid of when you think something's going to happen again, and acknowledging that. And we went in with Marc, talked about something very important, which is acceptance. you have to accept that it happened. Wanting to change it only makes you more miserable. And if you want to do a little experiment about that, is think about somebody you want to forgive, or something, that a grudge you're holding. Think about what happened, and just think about for a second what happens when you want to change that. And what happens is usually you get a good feeling at first, but then 5 or 10 minutes later, if you pay attention, you're much more miserable than when you started out. And so the second is to understand that forgiveness is a process. We can't forgive all at once. So one of the things I recommend is to see if you can forgive just a piece of something, maybe 5%, 10%. Forgive just a little piece of it, and then keep going back to it. And there's meditations you can do every day where you can just, for a little bit, just reflect on the situation of someone you would like to forgive. Can you extend just a little bit of forgiveness? Can you forgive maybe something else that you're holding on to that's less of that, that's less than that? And then from there, think good thoughts about yourself and that person. And then go back and look at, what barriers do you have to forgiving that person? Like, you need an apology to move on to that forgiveness. Well, if you go on and look at the case that Marc just talked about, he's not getting an apology from that person. That person's dead. And so holding on to that anger, that fear would only continue to hurt. And so starting to look at those barriers and understanding that those barriers are there because it's trying to keep you vigilant from what could happen to you again. And so looking at, again, from that adaptive process and removing the barriers one by one, talking with people about the barriers. If you can't forgive somebody about something, talk with somebody about it. Generally, someone who's a positive person, who's a mentor, the best person to talk about with that actually is a person in your life who you experience unconditional love with. Thanks for letting me share, Kev.
No problem. Thank you. And Marc, what's the website?
My website?
Yes.
MarcSavard.com. Marc with a C. MarcSavard.
And you can catch Marc 6 nights a week at the V Theater. Also the winner of Best Comedy Show this year, as well as Best Bargain Show, right?
Yeah.
And that was from reader and staff from the Review Journal.
Yeah.
Marc, it's been a great pleasure having you in. Thank you so much for sharing everything you did. We'll be back next week. You can always go to Will's website as well for more information on physical and mental health at helpneworleans.com. You can always email me at info@vegashypnosisshow.com. We'll talk to you next week.